Depression is a very difficult concept for many Christians to understand. We have so many factions in the church that have a false theology, a shaky theology on the matter of spiritual or emotional depression. I want to read a passage to you from Genesis chapter 4, and I hope that as you listen to this passage, you will understand that Cain, the first son of Adam and Eve, experienced a spiritual depression, a depression that led him to kill his own brother, Abel. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. And it goes on to tell us that the Lord rejected Cain's offering because it says he had no regard for Cain's offering. So Cain was very angry and his face fell. Now that expression, his face fell, is an indication of a great spiritual depression. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? And why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. It's desirous for you, but you must rule over it. The question that has been sent in is this: should Christians take antidepressants? Is depression a spiritual issue that should not be treated with drugs because it will mask a spiritual problem? Hi, I'm Dr. Chuck Betters with Mark Inc. Ministries, and we exist as a ministry for the purpose of answering these types of difficult questions. Before I begin to approach the question as it is written, I think it's important to note that there is such a thing as a chemical depression. There are people who, for some physiological reason, and most scientists don't even know why, their bodies fail to produce the necessary chemicals for the nerve endings to make transmissions back and forth. There's a material between nerve A and nerve B that's called synapse, and it's a conductor of electrical impulses and charges across one nerve to the other. But for some people, for some reason, their bodies stop producing that material. And so the nerve is sending a signal, but the body cannot absorb the signal, cannot make the decision that that nerve ending is calling for. And so as a result of that, people find themselves in lethargy, they find themselves in depression, and then certain drugs are used, certain chemicals are used to instigate and to cause the body to make that synapse material. For some reason, some people have to be on medications in order to produce that kind of material. But that's a rare situation. That does not happen that often, although it does happen more often than we think. I am approaching this question from the perspective of a spiritual depression, a depression that comes as the result of what happened with Cain. He had a choice to make. He was going to either do well, as the scripture says, do the right thing, or he was going to do the wrong thing. And he began a cycle of depression that eventually ended with the murder of his brother Abel. God told him very specifically, Cain, if you do well, if you make the right choice, your countenance will rise. You will come out of this depression. And God extended grace to Cain to understand that he had a choice to make. And the choice that he made was to kill his brother Abel. Now, many Christians try to say, well, the reason Cain hated his brother was because Cain's offering was rejected and Abel's was not rejected, because Cain did not provide a blood offering. Well, that's just not the case. Cain had the responsibility of tilling the soil. He had the responsibility of producing the food. Abel had the responsibility of maintaining the flocks. So both of them brought the best offering they could bring, but the heart was not right. Cain's heart was not right. Cain's attitude in worship was not right, and it ended in a terrible situation when he killed his brother. Well, the question then becomes, should Christians take antidepressants? I have two cases that I vividly remember as a pastor over the years that are diametrically opposed to each other. On the one hand, there was a lady, a young girl actually, she was in her teens, who convulsed every month for some reason. And nobody knew why she was convulsing. She was treated medically. They said she did not have any reason to convulse. She did not have any disease that caused her to convulse. And every month she was hospitalized, sometimes for days, and went into this deep spiritual depression. And I confronted her one time when she tried to throw herself out the second-story window of the hospital. I sat in her room that night for hours, and she was comatose. She would not talk with me. She would not speak to me. She would not respond in any way. And I told her, I said, I'm going to stay here until you tell me why you are so depressed, why this happens to you every single month. And I will make a very long story short. The situation was that when this girl was little, her father raped her. And her father, in raping her, every month when she had her period, she would bleed. And that blood reminded her of what her father had done to her. So we could have treated her with all kinds of drugs and medications. It would have done no good because the root problem was something much, much deeper than synapse material or some sort of chemical imbalance. But once she was able to reconcile that in her mind and deal with that, it brought her out of her depression. On the other hand, we had a woman, elderly woman, who went into a severe depression. And I tried everything with her. I gave her assignments, and I gave her homework to do, and I gave her scriptures to do. And she faithfully, every single week, faithfully came back, had done her homework, and her depression was getting worse and worse and worse. I realized then that I was probably out of my league, and I sent her to a specialist in Baltimore, Maryland. That specialist was there for the purpose of diagnosing whether or not there was some medical reason why this woman was so depressed. And the end result of that was that she was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease. A very tragic ending to her life. She was faithful in doing everything God required of her, but her body could not respond because of the Lou Gehrig's disease. So there are cases, there are times in which medical intervention is necessary, when drugs are necessary, when certain medications are necessary to get the body to produce the things that need to be produced. We hear it all the time from people who have been diagnosed with certain forms of schizophrenia or certain other mental illnesses. When they stop taking their medications, they go off the deep end. The reason is there is, in some cases, a basis for medical intervention. And even with Christians, there is a basis for certain medications to be taken. But for the most part, it's because we make wrong choices. It's because we begin a downward spiral of making those wrong choices to where we become so spiritually dysfunctional that we can't even see where we used to be. I hope this is helpful, and I know it's a very difficult topic to understand. But first thing I would do with people who are battling depression is to send them for medical examinations to determine whether or not there is another reason why they can't function the way they need to function. Having cleared that at that perspective, then I think it's important for us to teach people who are in depression how to manage day-to-day choices that they have to make so that they can reflect the glory of God.